1944, an American doctor named Ansel Keys conducted a very strange experiment. This guy wanted to see the effects of hunger on the human mind, human psychology, and the body. This experiment later became known as the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. Why did he do it? Let me tell you the historical context. Hop on, my friend. In World War II, hunger spread all across Europe. The war had destroyed farmlands and weakened the economies of many countries. The goal of the experiment was for America to figure out how to save these poor Europeans who were starving to death. He gathered a group of 36 volunteers and conducted a very harsh starvation experiment on them. The experiment lasted a full year and was divided into 3 stages. First, a preparatory phase. They would collect measurements like height, weight, and other things. This lasted 12 weeks. Then a starvation phase of 24 weeks, and then a rehabilitation phase of 12 weeks. The first stage, which is the preparatory phase, each individual consumed 3,200 calories per day. This is considered a sufficient amount for an active adult male. But in the second stage, the starvation phase, this amount went down to half, 1,570 calories. And from here, the experiment truly began. There were very clear behaviors. These people no longer thought, talked, or dreamed about anything but food. Their entire world revolved around food, to the extent that after the experiment, 3 volunteers changed their profession to something related to food. 2 of them became chefs, and the third became a farmer, and was the one who supplied them with goods. This experiment was very important. This was the basis for many experiments around the world, and many studies that proved there is a relationship between hunger and aggressive behavior. This experiment lasted less than a year. Forget about this experiment now, and let's go to the 11th century AD. Ride the camel with me, and let's go to a time of famine that lasted 7 years. But back then, it wasn't a controlled experiment. We couldn't withdraw from it or ask the doctor for mercy. It was a terrifying catastrophe with no end date. The enemy wasn't someone who was passing through and would eventually be on his way. It was chaos, terror, and hunger that killed about a third of Egypt's population. As the episode title says, it is the Mustansiriyyah hardship. To understand its causes, we need to go back a few years specifically to the beginning of the Fatimid state. Get the time machine, my friend. With the end of the era of the Rashidun Caliphate in 661, the Umayyad Caliphate was established and lasted 90 years. The Umayyads during their rule relied on Arabs, my friend, completely, in assigning all positions from governors, leaders, judges, and all administrative posts. We noticed that the others were completely marginalized, like the Persians, for example. Non-Arabs were often denied from reaching high positions. That's why when the Abbasids removed the Umayyads, even though they were also Arabs, the Abbasid slogan was justice for non-Arabs. Although the 2 states, the Umayyad and Abbasid, were Sunni if we look west of the Abbasid state, specifically at a land called Salamiyah in northwest Syria. We will find a group of Shia, followers of the Ismaili sect, moving actively. They will go to Tunisia fleeing from the Abbasids who had stripped them of their freedom. There they will establish their own Shia state led by Abdullah al-Mahdi. This state will become known as the Fatimid state. History guy. Looks like establishing a state is a very easy matter. I could easily establish my own state too. My friend, I'm just quickly going over historical events. Establishing a state was never easy. These Fatimids spent years sending missionaries to the countries of the Maghreb, and over time they won over the common people. They had land and succeeded in winning over the largest tribe, the Kutama Berber tribe that joined the Ismaili sect, and under the leadership of the Fatimid missionary Abu Abdullah al-Shi'i, they were able to overthrow the Aghlabid state in Tunisia. And with the takeover of Tunisia, the Fatimid state was established in 909. Tunisia at that time was called Ifriqiya. Certainly the Fatimids were not intending to establish a small state. No, they expanded significantly. Do you want to know why? I'll tell you. The Fatimids had their eyes on their main enemy. They were in competition with the Abbasid state in the east. They saw that they were more entitled to the caliphate than the Abbasids. They are both from Arab Quraishi origins, and they both had lifted the Arab monopoly on high positions. The Abbasids favored the Persians, and the Fatimids favored the Berbers. But the sectarian division of Sunni and Shia remained the main axis of conflict. The Fatimids set their sights on Egypt to be the capital of their state. Egypt, a land whose Nile banks are fertile, and its geography is not mountainous like North Africa. But next to the fertility of the land, Egypt's geographical location was more important. This is your primary focus if you want to describe Egypt beautifully. Egypt, my friend, is the heart of the Islamic world. It overlooks 2 seas, the Red and the Mediterranean. It's where the east ends and the west begins. It became known that whoever rules Egypt rules the Levant and the Hijaz, like a package deal. What was most important for the Fatimids is that Egypt is close to the Abbasid state. Egypt will bring them closer to Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasids, and vice versa. For many long years, the Fatimids sent missionaries to Egypt, and when they felt it was ready, they began invasion attempts. I'd like to tell you, my friend, that these attempts lasted 60 years. Caliph after caliph, and generation after generation, the dream of the Fatimids remained the same, to rule Egypt. They tried the first time in 914. They they failed. After 6 years, they tried again in 920. They failed again. And then after 23 years of intense work, they returned in 943, a third attempt, and they failed again. You might think that failure is just like that, just a failure. But I'd like to tell you that every attempt failed after massive battles and many casualties from both sides. This failure continued until the fourth attempt succeeded during the reign of the fourth Caliph Al-Mu'izz Lidin Allah. Thanks to the Fatimid commander Jawhar al-Saqlabi, mistakenly known in Egypt as Jawhar al-Sakhili, he was able to take Alexandria, and from there he was able to occupy all of Egypt with an army of 100,000 soldiers. To begin in 969, the era of the Fatimid state in Egypt. Come, my friend, let's make an Olympic historical leap in time, from the fourth Fatimid Caliph to the eighth Caliph Abu Tamim Mar'ad, known as Al-Mustansir Billah. Al-Mustansir Billah inherited a state that stood well on its feet. He took Egypt when it was at its peak. They had built Al-Mu'izz's Cairo and Al-Azhar Mosque and improved the irrigation infrastructure for agriculture. Al-Mustansir ruled a very vast state that included North Africa and most of the countries of the Maghreb, along with Egypt, the Levant in the north, and the Hejaz in the south, controlling a vast area, an empire. In addition to Sicily, this man had areas in Europe too. He had a Schengen passport. This man took over an empire spread across 3 continents. How would he manage all of this? Easily, history guy, just like those who ruled before him. It's not the first time, he's the 8th. The problem is that at that time he was still a child. What? How is that? Do you mean he was a child? Didn't know how to make decisions? No, my friend. He was a boy 7 years old. Interesting fact, my friend. His grandfather Al-Hakim bi Amr Allah became Caliph when he was 11. Back then, my friend, the Fatimid ruler used to go to the palace with his lunchbox. Al-Mustansir was a child when his father Caliph Al-Zahir li-Izas din Allah died. And I know, my friend, that you're surprised these names. But when you visit Egypt, first take me with you, and second, be ready to hear names even stranger than this. Anyway, because of this, Al-Mustansir's mother was the one running the country from behind the scenes. Her name was Rasad. This Queen Rasad was a Nubian concubine of Caliph Al-Zahir's and gave birth to Al-Mustansir. To ensure she had influence, and to secure her and her son's position, Rasad brought in a skilled minister named Ali al-Jarjarai. This man, my friend, had experience. He had held the position of prime minister twice before, once under Al-Hakim bi Amr Allah Al-Mustansir's grandfather, and once under Al-Zahir, his father. Al-Jarjarai, my friend, was a true statesman, the one from the books. He gathered the situation and sorted out the affairs, and things were running perfectly. But after 18 years of service as prime minister, he died. And with his death, my friend, Queen Rasad started interfering in governance again. But history guy, surely Al-Mustansir had grown up. He should have taken over, right? Or was he still a child? Frankly, he was a child, spoiled, lazy, and didn't care about anything. This Al-Mustansir had spent all these past years strolling on the side, relying on Mommy Rasad and Uncle Jarjarai to manage affairs. Any crisis? Uncle Jarjarai, please see to this matter. After Al-Jarjarai, no minister lasted long, maybe just one. And after that, Queen Rasad returned to interfering again. She fell into the habit of changing ministers like scarves. This minister doesn't match my outfit. His color clashes with my skin tone. It reached the point where people were saying the minister changed every week. If it were a hair routine, it would take longer. Among the absurdities is that Rasad appointed Abu Said al-Tustari as minister. What? Who is this al-Tustari anyway? Al-Tustari, my friend, was a merchant who would buy and sell anything for profit. One of his most famous deals, the queen herself, when she was a concubine. At that time, slavery was still present. Sometimes the old days come to my mind, then I remember we could have been sold on Amazon. Apparently, my friend, they ran out of competent ministers, so they brought in a slave trader out of sheer desperation. How could she trust someone who had sold her before? And before you think I'm being unfair to the man with these cheap jokes, let me clarify. The man was just a slave trader. He had no experience in running a state at all. Just like you and me, we don't know how to run a country. Also, my friend, this man was not even Muslim. He was Jewish, and this caused tension between him and the Egyptians. From that moment, my friend, with Queen Rasad, the decline began. The first signs of collapse appeared in the army. The Fatimid army, my friend, was multi-ethnic. There was a very large corps of Turkish soldiers and another large corps of Maghrebi Berber soldiers from the Kutama and Zawila tribes, after whom Bab Zawila in Cairo is named. And then Rasad added a Nubian unit by royal decree. Well, you don't need a genius to see that this Rasad created a disaster. Chaos erupted because of her constant changing of ministers. The tension within the army increased. Matters kept escalating until a Turkish unit assassinated Abu Said al-Tustari. Oh, Black Day. Yes, they killed the prime minister. This unit, my friend, went straight away to Caliph Al-Mustansir and told him, "Our master, we killed the man your mother imposed upon us." Al-Mustansir, as I told you, had a weak personality. Also, he couldn't confront a whole army unit. This move angered Queen Rasad, and she began reinforcing her Nubian corps. She reinforced her Nubian core vary significantly. Some sources say she bought 50,000 Nubians to protect her and her son. Although this number might be exaggerated, it is clear that Rasad was always keen on increasing her and her son's power. And so the battle began inside the Fatimid army. Turks and Maghrebis on one side, Nubians and Sudanese on the other. Boom! Dinosaurs. The two sides clashed in several battles in many areas. In Cairo, Giza, Bahira, everywhere in the Republic. After a series of battles, the Nubians lost and retreated to Upper Egypt, which started a new round of clashes there. It's like a league that never ends, a tour. One day these guys win, the next day those guys win, and the only one who loses? The people. Because whenever any side needed money or weapons, they would loot the markets and the citizens. The Turks stayed in Cairo and Giza, while the Nubians were in Upper Egypt, and even the Maghrebis, who were the least involved party in this war, saw that the northern region was empty and started causing trouble there too. Cairo was taken, Upper Egypt was taken, so let's go to Bahira. They caused devastation in Bahira and in the entire northwest region. The world caught fire, my friend. Amidst all these battles, of course, trade routes were cut, goods were stolen, irrigation systems were destroyed, and crops were plundered. Whoever could harm the other did so without hesitation. Whoever could harm the other did so without a second thought. And with this, Fatimid Egypt began a free fall, an economic and security collapse due to political reasons. And as you know, calamities do not come alone. To complete the classic duo of death and destruction, the Nile comes. Excuse me, everyone, I'm not feeling well. You carry on without me. This isn't a flood. This is a low water level. Get me a flood pill, please. Hey, Euphrates. Hey, Tigris. Jokes aside, my friend, the Nile throws a bomb at the worst possible moment you can imagine. The Nile surprised everyone by its level dropping to critically low levels. You better sit down, my friend, because the hardship is coming. In his book, The Nile, The Life Story of a River, the writer Emil Ludwig says that records document the flood seasons of the Nile over 13 and a half centuries. The man, who died in 1948, says that these records go back to the year 622. The writer explains this obsession with the Nile and its water levels that lasted for over 13 centuries. There is nothing more important to the farmer than the Nile's level, from which he knows how much water he will need and how much he will save from canals and dams. As for the government, it depends on these calculations for taxes, which increase with the flood. In other words, my friend, everything in Egypt depends on the Nile. But after all these years, the Nile chose to lower its level during one of the most difficult political crises Egypt had seen. At a time when there was an economic crisis, a security crisis, and almost a civil war inside the Fatimid army. There is no worse time for the Nile to betray us, but it did. According to Al-Makrizi in his book, Relief of the Nation by Revealing the Grief, the Nile's level in that year reached 12 cubits. Beautiful history, guy. 12 cubits is enough. My friend, 12 cubits is good if we're playing PlayStation 4, multiplayer mode, great. But for the Nile, it's a disaster. Ludwig, quoting the Greek historian Pliny the Elder, says, "He will find satisfaction in 13 cubits, joy in 14 cubits, security in 15 cubits, and delight in 16 cubits. 13 cubits is the minimum limit. Less than that is a catastrophe in a country already under attack, targeting crops, irrigation, and more." But to add drought on top of that. And so, my friend, politics and nature united against the Egyptian people. The land became barren, crops were ruined, and with the lack of water came lack of food. As a result of this chaos, diseases spread. This is the classic domino effect that causes famine or disaster. The Fatimid state began to lose its territories. Sicily seceded and decided to join Europe. Al-Mu'iz ibn Badiz, the ruler of Tunisia and Algeria, declared his independence and began praying for the Abbasid Caliph in Friday prayers. The same thing happened in Mecca and Medina in the Hejaz. Remember that the Friday prayer was like the official broadcast? It was how they declared their political allegiance. At the same time, the Turkish Seljuks advanced and took northern Levant. A complete collapse led to what became known as the Mustansiriyyah hardship. Now, my friend, you don't need an introduction. We've entered the serious part now. Started with prices rising dramatically. Al-Makrizi described it as exorbitant inflation. According to him, bread prices in Egypt varied over the years. 1 dinar could buy from 4 to 6 rodols of bread, meaning on average about 5 rodols, and this is approximately 2.25 kilograms of bread per dinar. But just a few months into the crisis, hyperinflation struck. After just 1 year of the crisis, a dinar could buy only 1 kilogram of wheat. Suddenly, the Fatimid currency lost more than half its value. The crisis began in 457 AH, 1064 AD, and imposed a new reality on the Egyptians. Historians describe it in terrifying terms. Ibn Taghribirdi says in his book, The Shining Stars on the Kings of Egypt and Cairo, in the reign of Al-Mustansir in Egypt, there was an inflation unlike any other except in the time of Joseph. He compared the situation to the 7 lean years of Prophet Joseph. And again, my friend, these 7 years were also due to the low level of the Nile. But this time, there was also a security crisis, military infighting, and disease, a compounded crisis with a severe impact. Al-Makrizi describes it as follows: "And in the days of Al-Mustansir, inflation reached a limit unknown in Cairo and Egypt. Its cause was the seizure of control of the state by the princes, so prices rose and inflation increased and was followed by diseases. Crops were ruined, and all roads were cut off by land and sea." All of this was happening while the factions of the Fatimid army were still hitting each other. The soldiers needed food, so each faction would plunder the civilians in its territory. This chaos forced Caliph Al-Mustansir to send his wife and children out of Egypt. He sent them to take refuge in the Levant. Then came another wave of inflation. Again, 1 dinar could now buy only 650 grams of bread. Most people were dying of hunger. At the same time, the wealthy began to take out their hidden savings and buy food at any price. The generous among them helped the poor. This situation continued for 2 years until wheat completely disappeared from the market. Welcome to the bottom, my friend. Ibn Taghribirdi describes the 5th year of the famine. Wheat was sold in Egypt for 100 dinars. The erdab was sold for 100 dinars. And after that, it was no longer available. People had the money, but there was no wheat. Not there. At that time, crisis merchants appeared. They were hoarding grains and wheat and selling them at a high price in times of disaster. Perhaps the most famous example of this is Darb al-Tabak. Al-Makrizi says, "An alley was sold in Egypt for a dish of bread, a loaf for each house. It was thus named Darb al-Tabak. Its name remained until it disappeared." You understand what he wrote? A whole alley was sold with all its houses in exchange for a single dish containing loaves of bread. And with this, the desperate search of Egyptians for calories began, for any source of energy. Dogs and cats were the first available victims. Al-Makrizi says, "Dogs and cats were eaten until dogs decreased." Ibn Taghribirdi continued, "A dog was sold for 5 dinars and a cat for 3 dinars. A confirmed disaster. Liver sandwich for 1 EGP. Oh God, a comprehensive catastrophe." And here comes the question, where was the caliph? The truth is, my friend, Al-Mustansir was like the people, helpless. He himself suffered from famine and poverty. This man, my friend, was very poor. He started selling the palace's belongings. He went out riding a mule with a servant. 3 hungry men attacked him, beat them, stole the mule, and ate it. This man ran to Al-Mustansir, bruised, humiliated, and not seeing straight. Al-Mustansir sent for these hungry men. They were hanged and crucified in public as a warning to people. History guy, did it work? I'd like to tell you, my friend, that people woke up the next day and found that there was nothing left of these crucified men except their bones. The hungry people, who were supposed to be a lesson, were eaten on that very night. The sources do not stop here, my friend. They describe groups of people standing on the rooftops of houses in narrow alleys, hunting people with hooks and iron skewers, throwing the hook into a person's chest or back. As soon as they were hooked, they would be pulled to the rooftop in 10 seconds. Before they could even realize what was happening, they would be put in the pot and cooked. This wasn't just one case or two. It turned into a trade. It happened in a place called Darb al-Kandil, and later became known as Darb al-Mughtalin in Fustat, Egypt. One of these human flesh traders kidnapped a woman to kill her, either to eat her or sell her. But the man was so hungry that he cut off a piece of her thigh and ate it. This woman somehow managed to trick him and escape. She ran outside screaming and calling for help. The police rescued her and raided the house. According to sources, they found thousands of corpses inside. Maybe not literally, but metaphorically, indicating a large number of corpses. The question is, what would make this many bodies present inside one house? Why were there so many corpses in that house? What happened? The answer, my friend, is famine. Human flesh became a commodity. And now, my friend, comes the iconic story of this era, the one that many sources agree upon and which might have been a turning point or a cry of pain that led to healing. A woman sold a very expensive necklace worth about 1,000 dinars, according to prices before the famine. 1,000 dinars before the famine. Prices after the famine had changed, so it meant it was worth much more. She sold the necklace, traveled to the countryside, and bought a sack of flour. She hired guards to protect her, and the sack on her way back to Cairo. When she got close to her house, she dismissed the guards. She took a few steps, and the hungry people attacked her like zombies. They ripped the sack in two and snatched the flour handful by handful. All that was left with her, my friend, was a very small scoop of flour. She returned home and baked one small piece of bread. Then she took it and went to the palace of Al-Mustansir Billah, gathered people and cried out while raising the loaf high, "O people of Cairo, pray for Al-Mustansir, whom God has bestowed upon us, and has chosen us to enjoy looking at him, until I obtained this piece of bread for 1,000 dinars. Remember when I told you that a dinar used to buy 2.25 kulibas of bread? Now, 1,000 dinars dinars barely got this woman one loaf of bread. When Al-Mustansir asked his guards about the crowd gathered outside his palace, they told him the story. And this was likely the moment he realized that if he waited any longer, the country would fall. The Fatimid state would collapse. People were literally eating each other. They were dying of hunger, diseases, and war. They resorted to cannibalism. There were no farmers left to plant. The land became barren, and life became impossible. Again, as I told you before, a third of the population died. 1 out of every 3 died from hunger. Ibn Iyas said you could walk from Ibn Tulun Mosque to Bab Sawila and not meet a single soul. Suddenly, Cairo, the city that is the beginning of the West and the end of the East, one of the most crowded capitals in the history of the world, that is between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean with all those beautiful geographical features, became empty. A third of it was gone. People either died or were hiding in their homes, afraid of being food for the starving. The distance from Ibn Tulun to Bab Zawila is about 3 kilometers. If you walked that distance today, you would meet 2 million people. You would meet familiar faces. But during the Mustansiriyyah hardship, Cairo was literally dying. That's why they had to find a solution. And that solution, my friend, was a man named Badr al-Din al-Jamali. His full name was Abu al-Najm Badr al-Din al-Mustansiri, known as Commander of the Armies. He was a strict and firm man, and he had proven his skill in administration when he was appointed as commander of the Fatimid army in the Levant. But most importantly, my friend, Al-Mustansir specifically chose him because he could confront the Turkish factions. Why, my friend? Because this Al-Jamali was of Armenian origins, and in his homeland in southeastern Anatolia, he had gained extensive experience in fighting the Turks. He agreed to take on the task of saving Egypt, but under 2 conditions. First, he would come with his own army and men. Second, his word would be final until this crisis passed, and Al-Mustansir had no choice but to agree. Al-Jamali began his journey to Egypt with an army of 20,000 Armenians. He began in the Sharqiya governorate, and frankly, he did a good job. At that time, there was a tribe called Al-Wata. During the famine, this tribe was monopolizing the land for itself, using force to control everything. Al-Jamali went to them, bought them, and took over Sharqiya. He dispersed the tribe, took their belongings, and started supplying the markets with food. He also supplied the palace with the essentials it needed. Wow, history, guy! Things are finally starting to clear up. Then Al-Jamali took over Alexandria, appointed a governor from his men, and did the same thing he did in Sharqiya, planted the land and supplied the market. After that, he began clashing with the Turkish factions and managed to defeat them in several battles, clipping their wings. He also dealt with the Maghrebi tribes in Bahira and west of it. As for Upper Egypt, he summoned the regional chiefs and made agreements regarding agriculture and securing trade routes. Agriculture became a state order. Either you plant or we will take your land. The farmers were exempted from taxes for 3 years to encourage them to go back to work. The most important of Al-Jamali's reforms was the elimination of monopolies and disciplining the merchants who were hoarding during crises and wars. He pulled a very clever and theatrical trick. What did he do, history guy? He summoned the biggest merchants from all over the country. He called them for a meeting. What's so clever about that, history guy? He'll gather them all and kill them, and then he won't even know where the supplies are or who runs the markets. What a failure! Don't even finish the story. I'm leaving the video. Wait a minute. What really happened was that Al-Jamali gathered all these merchants for a meeting and left them waiting in a courtyard in the palace. Then he brought in prisoners sentenced to death, cleaned them up, shaved them, to the point that they looked like new. He dressed them up to the point that they looked like rich merchants, with round turbans and long flowing robes. While the real merchants were still waiting and didn't understand what Al-Jamali was doing, he entered with one of the disguised prisoners and began scolding him publicly. You have disobeyed the caliph's orders. You have hoarded goods and raised prices on the people. Then he drew his sword and cut off his head, executing the death sentence that had been originally passed on him. The merchants were seized with panic. They thought he had just killed one of them. Al-Jamali continued like this, cutting off the heads of the rest of the prisoners sentenced to death, whom he had disguised as merchants. As soon as he finished, he looked at the real merchants and was about to speak when their leader stepped forward and said to Badr al-Din al-Jamali, "It is clear you are threatening us, so whatever you want, consider it done. If you are asking if we have grain stored away, yes, we do. We will release it into the market in an hour, and if there are no workers to operate the mills, bakeries, and farms, we will operate them ourselves. We don't want to displease you." Al-Jamali asked about the prices. The merchant replied, "The rotiel, for a dinar." Al-Jamali raised his sword again. The merchant was seized with panic and cut the price to half. Al-Jamali raised the sword and the merchant lowered the price. And so it continued until they reached the price that Al-Jamali considered fair. And from here, goods started appearing in the markets again. Al-Makrizi describes this. God helped the people, and the Nile rose again, and the strife was lifted. People helped each other, and goodness prevailed. The hardship was revealed healed and the distress was relieved. It was Badr al-Din al-Jamali who built the Al-Gamaliya district. That's where the name comes from. He also built the Mosque of Mashhad al-Juyash. In the end, the Mustansirite hardship was not just a normal famine caused by natural events. It was a complex crisis born from a catastrophic triangle: civil war, water shortage, and disease. A terrifying mix of poor governance and weak authority. The result: 7 painful years, a terrifying chapter of history as we have seen together. As you know, my friend, Egypt can get sick, but it never dies. Egypt recovered and Al-Mustansir continued his reign. The irony is that it became one of the longest reigns in history. This caliph who took the throne when he was 7 years old, whose mother caused all sorts of conspiracies, whose ministers changed every week, he ruled during the famine that killed 1/3 of the population. A famine still known by his name, and he wasn't the one who solved it. He ruled for a full 60 years, one of the longest reigns in history. Last thing, but not least important, don't forget, check the sources below and subscribe if you are on YouTube. In the end, my friend, thank you for your attention, you delicious sweet piece. Calm down, history guy. What has the hunger done to you? You know, my friend, if you had been alive during the famine that hit Egypt, you wouldn't have been eaten. Why, history guy, do you mean I'm not sweet? No, I mean you would have been put in the tea because you are sugar. Yeah, history guy. That's a pickup line from another era. All right, my dear, I'm going to hunt some humans. Coming with me?